Just, yep.
Hello and a very good afternoon. I, Udit Kapoor, a second year BTech student of the North Cap University, welcome you to another live stream by IEEE NCU Student Branch. We are announcing the formation of a new community in our college, the Python Warriors Club. This club is an initiative of IEEE IES North Cap University Student Branch and aims to develop a community that's all about Python. Getting an error with your code? We are here. Need a senior to help on a project? We are here. Want to learn about Python basics? Well, you guessed it right. We are here. And in the spirit of Python as a community, we have with us Mr. Leon Sandoy, a full stack Python developer at Vimeo and the proud owner of Python Discord server, which has over 1 lakh members who help each other as a community. Leon goes by the handle name of Lemon on Discord, and be sure to check out his server from the link in the description. Over to you, Yatharth.
So hi everyone, I'm the second panelist of this, like the Python, the first Python cast we're having, and hello and welcome to the, hello and welcome Leon. We are
Thank
glad to
you.
have you here, and we would love to know about the journey that you traversed over the years of developing bots in Python, and how is it going right now?
It's going well. Thanks for asking. You want to hear about my journey, as in how I got started with programming?
Programming in general, and then we will come to the server.
So I didn't actually start coding until I was 21. And the reason for that is because when I was a kid, I was always told that programming was essentially a form of maths, that it was this complicated academic technical discipline that you had to go to school for years and years in order to understand. And then when I was 21, my sweetheart, Sophie, bought me a book on C++ basics. And I was like, why did you buy me this? This isn't for me. I don't have years of academic research. I have no idea. There's no way I can understand this. But then I read the book just because I was on a long plane ride and I had it with me. And it turns out my whole life, people had been lying to me. Coding wasn't actually impossible for me to do. It was quite logical. I understood everything in this book, and I felt like C++ was quite an approachable language. And I got really interested in sort of understanding all the stuff that I had been missing out on. So I started learning C, I started learning C++, and I was fascinated by them, but I didn't really like fall in love because there was something about those particular languages that didn't quite work for me. And then my friend, a friend of mine who works at Unity today, at the time, he was an ops engineer. I was an ops engineer when I was 21. I was working for an ISP. I was a network engineer. And the two of us decided that we were going to write an IRC bot for internet relay chat. And when I Googled, like, how do I write an IRC bot, basically Python came up as the first, the easiest option. So we started learning Python together. And that's when I fell in love. Like, I found my call. Python really spoke to me. It was so readable and so beautiful. And I found myself completely infatuated with it. So I started writing all sorts of projects with it. I brought it with me to work. I started automating lots of these boring manual tasks that I had at work. Like at work, at the ISP, I would have tasks like go through this Excel sheet and, get the relevant data out of a CRM system, put it in an Excel, turn it into a graph, and then present that as a PDF to the leadership group. That's something I had to do every month. Well, you can do that with Python. It's easy. A couple of API calls.
One line.
Sorry, yeah, it's not a lot of work. And books like Automate the Boring Stuff with Python by Al Zweigart. Basically have a recipe specifically for doing that kind of thing. I love Zweigart, by the way. He was one of my first. The first book I started with was Invent with Python. It's written for kids. It's like making little games and stuff in Python, and it's so instructive, and I highly recommend his stuff. So I started automating everything at work, and I didn't even tell anyone. My boss thought that I was just doing all these things manually, but actually I had automated away half of my tasks. I had all the time in the world, because
That's like,
you
right.
know what I mean?
Yep, exactly. Like that's what actually got me like to start in the Python, because like I came across these different websites and I explored that, automate boring stuff with Python, and then I came to your server in back in like 2017 when I was like in my first year, and then I kind of like faced problems in my first bot that was like automating my assignments. Basically, like we had to code, and then we had to like spend like 10 to 20 minutes or even like 30 minutes to make files for that. So basically, like I kept all of my coding files in a folder, and then I sort of like learned to use that OS library. And then I was having some doubts, like how do we traverse in directories? And then I came to the Python Discord server, and they helped me out. Like I met Geodio and you, by the way.
Yeah.
So that's how it came.
So we have been surrounded by Python almost every time we need to do a program. Well, Leon, I have a question for you. Many people say that it's hard to learn Python if you're already coding in C++, Java, or C. Like you have to learn a new language basically. So is it true, or are the fundamentals totally same? Please, we would love to hear what you have to say.
I think the
Yeah.
fundamentals are more or less the same. I took the stuff that I had learned about C and C++ and applied it to Python. Of course, you have to relearn some of those things because the Python, idiomatically, Python is a very different language, by which I mean it has different principles. It's very focused on readability. It's very focused on good documentation, and on writing code that not only works, but which is easy to modify later and for other people to work with. And I think that you don't really have that in C. So you have to sort of relearn the methodology a little bit. But
It has like garbage collector, like the excellent
sure,
garbage
yeah,
collector. It
it
has no
abstracts
place.
some of the stuff that you would do manually in C, you get for free in Python. But like fundamentally, they are the same. You're learning some stuff in C that you wouldn't need in Python, but that is still useful to know about, like data
About
types.
the backend and stuff like that,
Something that's,
basically.
huh?
Like the backend and stuff, like how things actually work behind
Yes,
the scenes. That is
on
what
a
C
lower
shows,
level, exactly.
right?
So Python, yeah, it's pretty high level. But then again, you need to get over that. So C++, for instance, is object-oriented. C isn't, but C++, you have classes as a very like important fundamental component, and that applies perfectly to Python as well. And I think it's one of the biggest gaps to get over as a beginner is to understand what is a class and what is object-oriented programming. Like, how does it work? That took me a long time to sort of really, for that to dawn on me, like how it all worked. But as soon as you have that understanding, it works in any object-oriented language. And I think Python, or if you're running C# or Java, there are many things that are mutually intelligible between these languages that you can take lessons from one and apply to the other.
And by the way, like when was this when you like actually got the grasp of object-oriented programming, like in the first place?
Well, yeah, that took me a few years because when I was starting out with Python, I wrote everything functionally. I just wrote a
Right.
bunch of functions, ugly functions in a big file. I didn't really modularize anything. I didn't have a lot of classes or other concepts. I just had very like sequential solutions. And later on, so the first project we did with this bot, right, for the IRC, and the bot kept growing and becoming more and more complex, and we realized, I really need to solve this problem in a better way because this is becoming
What kind of
unmanageable.
bots were they like in the IRC chat? And can you like give a new generation the idea of what is IRC bot? Because like in
Yeah,
1990s we know that, but
no,
I
no, no.
think
Okay.
new
So
generation,
IRC is, so when I grew up in the 90s, IRC was the big sort of social network in a way. It's
right?
a server you would connect to and chat with your friends or with strangers. And it was especially good for finding people who were experts in some technical discipline. So if you needed someone who knew everything about Linux, You'd go to IRC, there would be channels where that guy would be. And this is interesting as well, ties into the community that I started, or that I helped build at least. IRC was not a very nice place. IRC
Yeah,
was kind of
it's
a
a primitive, I think.
yes,
And I
a
have a
very
question for that. Like,
yeah.
I think, like IRC and IRC has two children right now. That is Slack and Discord. And I think Microsoft Teams is like even like grandchild of that.
Hmm.
Like as I can see, the evolution of chatting platforms. What do you think about that?
I mean, IRC is still alive,
Right.
and there are some people who still insist on using it because it has it's more open, right? Like it's self-hosted servers. Nobody really owns it, unlike Slack and Discord, which are owned by these corporations that control them completely. So there are some
Okay,
advantages
centralized.
in that sense to IRC still, even today, I think.
Right.
And then there are some other servers that try to be more like Discord, but to bring with them the concept from IRC, the openness, and stuff like Matrix, I think is one of them. I haven't really um, tried Matrix myself, but I've heard that that can be like a nice open source alternative. But the problem is nobody really uses those. And so if you want to talk to people, you got to go where the people actually are. And
Exactly.
right now, people are on Slack or they're on Discord, I feel.
Well, talking
So
about this,
that has like navigation issues, right?
What do you mean?
Like IRC, it's like not preferred because it
Right.
has navigation issues.
It's complicated to find what you're
Right.
looking for on IRC, absolutely.
Right.
You kind of have to happen upon it. And I mean, there's no way to like browse the existing stuff very easily. You could look at
Exactly.
all the channels, but there would be thousands of them. And then maybe you could look at the most popular channels, but they're not necessarily the best ones. So yeah, it's not ideal. It's not made for a modern, contemporary sort of approach to, like Discord is very modern in that sense, yeah.
coming to Discord,
Totally.
uh, I wanted to ask you, like you joined the server when there were just 300 members on it, and
Mhm.
now it's a community of over 1 lakh people. So I just wanted you to share a story that reminded you of the early days, or something that happened when the server was very small. Something peculiar that you would like to share with us.
One thing I can share is a story from one of the earlier what I so this isn't really like the earliest early days. Back then there was very little happening. We had okay, so I can tell you two stories. One of them is a very early story. When in
Okay.
February 2018, I think, we started coding our own bot and our website and all of the services that we use today for the community. This was because we were using a bot called Rowboat that was providing us with like moderation features and all the stuff we needed. But this bot was going out of commission, so we needed to make our own tools. So we started to make the bot and we started to make the web server, and everyone was invited to come in and help us. And then we had started writing the website, and one of the developers who was working on the team with us, he decided he completely changed the web app to a new framework and then force push it to master. And you should never force push anything to master on any repo. This is something that really we should have made it impossible to do it, but we hadn't because we were still new to it. So what happens when you force push to master is that you break the history for everyone else, and it completely messes up the repo, and it's very difficult to recover it. And in the end, we just had to create a new repo for the site and more or less start over, move all the code over from the earlier part in history. And it was a disaster. So we had to go through and create a policy for like what you're allowed to do and restrict everyone's accesses. But this was the kind of community we were back then. Now we didn't have any kind of anything in place, so people could just pretty much do whatever. Everyone had admin access to everything.
It actually sounds like a humble beginning, but
Yeah.
then, yeah, and I think we are
Yeah,
talking about version control, right? Here,
master
Yes,
it.
with Git especially.
yeah,
Sorry, what
and
were you
that
saying?
might be like you are like quite much into DevOps stuff. So, what kind of tools do you like, and what is the workflow that you follow at your place?
I'll get into that in a second. I just wanted to tell you another story from the
Please.
community that I thought was quite nice. We run these events all the time at the community. We'll talk more about that later, I think. But in the very early days, I started doing these code jam events, which were just the concept is that we take some strangers and we put them all together in teams, and then we give them a task and you say you have 10 days to make this thing with these other people you've never met before. The idea is to take them out of their comfort zone. And we had one where one of the people in this team, he was quite poor and he didn't have a computer, and he did all of his development on mobile devices. And writing Python on a mobile device on Android is very difficult because there really isn't a good editor. You can't test the code. You can't actually run the code. And he was writing a Kiwi app, which is like a graphical user interface. And in spite of all of this, that team ended up winning the contest. They had the best application out of all of them, even though this guy had no equipment to write the code on. So that was impressive, and I really like this guy. His nickname is Inventor. He's a friend of mine now. And so what happened was we were going to give the prizes out to this team. So we told the team, okay, so we're going to give you a few $100s of DigitalOcean credit each, and you're going to get a license, and you're going to get this, and you're going to get that, and T-shirts, right? And they all said, we don't want these prizes. Can you take all of that money and try to put it into a laptop for our team member who doesn't have a computer? They all said, just take the prices you were going to give us and use that money for a laptop, please. We're begging you. And it wasn't really enough for a laptop, but the staff thought this was such a nice idea, so we all chipped in, 50 euros each or something like that. And in the end, we ended up with a pot that was able to buy a laptop for this user. And so he walked away having won the contest and with a whole new equipment, a whole new world of ways to develop properly and being able to test. And I learned later that guy actually got a job as a developer and was able to, quite early, he's quite young. I think he's 17 when he got this job or something, writing code full time then with his new laptop. So they're the kind of things that make me sleep well at night. Like I love little stories like that coming out of our community,
That's truly an inspiring story.
That's actually cute.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest.
So you talked about DevOps.
Yeah,
Let's
DevOps.
talk about the DevOps. I'm really into DevOps. You're right about that. And the thing about DevOps is the reason I like it so much is because DevOps's goal is to increase productivity for everyone. Are you guys familiar with agile development?
Can you please come again?
Agile development?
Agile development, yep. We are familiar with that.
The core concept, I would argue, of agile is that
Rapid production.
I spend a week writing code, then I'm producing, 1 unit of work. But if I spend a week helping 3 other people progress with their tasks, then they will produce 3 units of work. So it's always better for me to unblock a colleague or to help increase the productivity of the whole team than it is for me to just sit and code. This is a really nice sort of team-focused methodology, because that means DevOps is maybe the most productive and most agile thing you can do. Every time I write a tool that makes it quicker to deploy, well, then someone doesn't have to sit and wait for the deployment to happen. So at Python Discord, we automatically deploy everything as soon as there is a push to the source control. So when someone writes some code for the bot, if it gets merged into the source control, it just immediately restarts the bot and redeploys with this new code. That's a typical DevOps thing. Today we do this with something called SaltStack, but I'm not going to recommend that anyone uses that tool. We're actually in the
SaltStack, right?
Yeah, SaltStack. Yeah, it's written in Python actually, and SaltStack is an interesting tool, but it's more for managing a large park of servers. Like if you have 100 servers and they all have to run the same software, SaltStack's amazing for that, because what it does is it sets up this one master and then it has all of these other servers be sort of minions, which can then be set up all the way from installing all the packages on the local machine and like the right operating system and everything that you need, and then starting the servers and the services. But
That sounds like some big data stuff, like how
yeah, I mean,
the Hadoop actually works.
we
I
really
mean,
only have
that's
one
the sound
server.
of it.
Yeah, but
So,
for
so
one, I think it's going to be efficient.
Yeah,
yeah, but what we're doing now is that we're working on moving over to Kubernetes. And with Kubernetes, you don't have a server in the same sense. You all of the services that you run are sort of serverless. They just belong to this ether of processing power. So it's like a cloud almost, like that you just spit your containers into, and then they just work. This is a little bit more complicated to wrap your head around, but it's very easy to manage. So that's the kind of thing we're doing now. But there are many other parts of DevOps. It's not just about development and deployment. It's about, for instance, quality control. Like if you write some code, I want to make sure that that code doesn't break anything. So maybe you have some unit tests. So maybe
right.
now I
I
set
was
up something
getting onto
that.
that.
So the DevOps angle is that those unit tests have to run every time before you are allowed to merge that code into the source control. And if any of the tests are failing, then you're not allowed to merge it.
Or else we'll have the same issue that we had.
Yeah, because I don't want you to break my stuff. So you don't get to merge it if you have broken my stuff. Same thing with the deployment. I need to check that the build works. So we have a tool that checks that the build will be successful. It tries to build it first. And then if that fails, well, then you have to fix the build before you're allowed to merge. This is a very typical DevOps tool. It's called continuous integration, CI. And you can use GitHub Actions, for instance, in order to do these kinds of checks. It's a really good tool that's built into GitHub itself, and you can use it for free. So setting up all of these little checks and balances, essentially, so that we know that the code is good enough quality and that it's been validated correctly before it gets deployed, and ideally that it just gets deployed automatically. Nobody has to sit and manually deploy stuff. These are the types of things we do as DevOps engineers, is just to make sure everything is very smooth and automatic.
Right. And actually, like, if you can give an example, that would be great. Like, how did you use, like, in one of your projects, or maybe like a layman example
Yeah.
to help everyone understand? Like, of the
Okay.
unit testing, maybe some example that can throw light on it.
Okay. So for unit tests,
Yeah, right.
we have a website. We create a new page on that website,
Right.
and before we are allowed to merge that page, to put that in our source control, we have to write a test that tries to load the page and see if it works. And maybe it checks if the page looks or acts the way that we're expected to act. So we write a little test that just goes to the page, makes a little request, and it says, okay, this page has loaded, and it gives a successful load message, and maybe it contains this or that, which you're expecting to be on the page. So now I have a unit test, and then every time we're going to deploy something new, we run this test to make sure we didn't break one of the pages.
Exactly.
So that's a very simple idea of what the unit test can do. And same if you have a bot, you make a new command for the bot, and then you make a little test that tries to run this command and sees if the command returns the expected result.
The idea is in any project, any website, any app, any server bot, you have to first test the new feature. It doesn't make sure it doesn't blow up the app or the project itself, and it
Yeah.
works according to what it is. So the main point would be to add tests before adding any new functionality to a project.
Yeah, and many developers actually would go so far as to write the test before they even start writing the feature. This is called test-driven development. And the idea is you write a test that checks if the feature works. It doesn't work because you haven't made it yet. Then you make it, and now the test is passing. Good. Then it works the way that you expected it to. And you keep making tests that test new features or new aspects of this thing, and then you keep writing it after you've made the test so that it corresponds exactly with yours. with your specifications. But even very, very simple stuff like testing that you can access the page on a website, it's very easy to do. And it's not beneficial right there and then. Okay, you wrote this page. Of course it works. You just wrote it. But what about 6 months from now? You make some other thing, and maybe that thing breaks that page that you made 6 months ago. And you don't know, because you're not going to test every page every time you make a change to your website. That's too much work. You have 1,000 pages on your website. So you have unit tests that run all of these little automated tests and make sure you didn't break something else when you made that change.
Exactly, like that's the thing about version controls, like unanimously. Like you can always like break things and revert back to the previous version. I mean, like that's one thing, except from the unit test that we talked about. And I think like the first example that I give to everyone like, to introduce a version control, and that is Google Docs. Basically, like they append the changes, and then there is a version history feature that is actually laid out in that, and we
Yeah.
can see like, whatever the things like we previously did, and that's like a very pragmatic way to explain things.
Actually, that's a very good example for a person who's new to coding. Version control might seem something a very complex topic, but something that
Exactly.
you in Google Docs or Google Excel, I think that's pretty good. We have a history of what each person has done, and we can always revert back to the more stable version if the new updates don't work. So that's the
Yep.
craft of it, version control.
Or even
Uh,
Wikipedia has the same thing as well.
Yeah, actually, I had a question for you, Leon. What's the core difference between a community on Python Discord, like a Python Discord, and something Overflow? So,
And
what would
something,
Stack Overflow?
aha, right. Well, Stack Overflow is very focused on answering the questions. So you ask a question and you get answers for that question. But there's really no aspect of sort of
Conversation.
socializing, conversation, exactly, getting to meet people. So I guess the biggest difference is that Python Discord allows you to actually get to know people and have normal conversations about whatever. And it doesn't have to just be getting help for your problem. So that's probably the biggest benefits. And of course, we run all of these events that wouldn't really be possible in the Stack Overflow context. But I do think that Stack Overflow is something we should all be using, because it's an amazing resource full of like problems and solutions. Usually when you Google an error message or describe some problem you're having, you will find a Stack Overflow detailing that exact problem, because you're not the first person who had that problem. Someone else had that problem before you, and they went on Stack Overflow and they asked. And then they probably got a pretty good answer. So you should always use a search engine to search for the problem that you're having, the error message that you're getting, because you'll probably get a good Stack Overflow about it. But
So I have a question regarding that. So
yeah.
like, what if like Stack Overflow wasn't there in this world? So let's come to that.
Yeah.
Like, how would the world look like if Stack Overflow wasn't there at all? I think
I,
people would still come on forums. What's your stance on that?
yeah, everything would be broken all the time and nobody would know how to fix it. I guess. No,
Right.
it's like a pillar of programming society at this point. I don't know if we could do without it.
I mean, that's a question asked on Quora, and like 1,000 people answered it, and they were like, "We would go broke," and like
Yeah,
a bit of memes on that.
be the end of days. Planes would fall from the sky.
Oh my god, exactly. And then imagine being rated on that.
Actually won't have any meaning because you won't be able to see the mistakes you're making or the other people have already made.
There are even like extensions like grepper. What's your view on that? Like,
Grepper?
yeah, exactly. Like grepper, basically you code and then you say that you got error, and then the extension searches the code snippet for you.
Oh,
I mean,
right.
from
Yeah.
the Stack Overflow. I mean, they
All right.
are kind of
That's
like
cool. I've seen
automated.
some Django plugins that will show you a related Stack Overflow answer whenever your page breaks as well, like on a debug page kind of thing. I think that stuff is awesome. I think that when you're not able to find an easy answer on Stack Overflow or by search by using a search engine like DuckDuckGo or Google, that's when you need to turn to a community. And probably, to answer your question seriously, if we didn't have Stack Overflow, well, then we'd probably be using IRC or Slack or Discord servers much, much more than we are today to answer these questions. And I guess another service would spring up and take its place. But
Someone who come up with this idea, what if we had a forum for programmers? Like someone would come up with this.
Of course, yeah. If it wasn't Stack Overflow, it'd be someone else.
Yep, it would be someone else.
So talking about bots, like you had mentioned, which goes through your code and opens the relevant page. I recently read that there was something in preparation to convert a code that's already been written in C++ or C, for example, to directly into the language you want. So code conversion, like if it's already in C++, it's written, and converting it into Java or Python without the use of actual human beings. So that's something you can show some light on.
Yeah, transpiling, as they call it. Yeah, there are many, especially game frameworks that are doing this now, because what you want is you want to write one app, and then you want that app to work on all sorts of platforms, like mobile. You want it in a browser, probably on desktop, on Mac, on Linux, on Windows, everywhere. And you might not be able to write that in a single language and have it work everywhere, because on iOS they expect Objective-C. On Android, you need Kotlin or Java.
Right.
So often then you would use some sort of framework. Maybe on Python we have something called Kivy, which allows you to write code in Python that would work both on desktop and on Android and on iOS. It does this transpiling in a way. Well, it doesn't really transpile. Transpiling means to turn one language into another.
Exactly.
And you can do that on Python as well. There are some tools that do this, especially to transpile Python into JavaScript is a thing that you can do with various tools. But more commonly, you would just install a Python interpreter on the iOS device or on the Android device and then run the Python code on it. That's what Kivy does, essentially. It's a lot more complicated than that, and it's really hard to write something like this. But it works fairly well. So if you want to write a mobile app, you can do it in Python using something like Kivy. But also the big frameworks that do this are stuff like Unity, a huge game framework that you can write games with, but also normal desktop apps that will allow you to export to pretty much any platform, even to like consoles and stuff. You want to make a PlayStation 4 game, you can do it with Unity essentially. So,
example for exporting a single project into different, if that game needs to work on iOS, if the game needs to work on Android, Unity is a very good example. And
yeah.
actually, Flutter can also be an example.
Yes.
Yeah.
I like Flutter a lot.
Yeah.
So Flutter is this framework managed by, I think, Google, and it uses a language called Dart. And you can write your code for a mobile app. It's specifically made for like apps, not games, but like normal apps. So you write an app, you might be able to write a game, I'm not that familiar, but you write an app in Dart, and then Flutter makes that app work on iOS and on Android natively. So you get like excellent high performance code. And the best thing about Flutter, the absolute best thing, is that it allows you to emulate. You can start an iOS emulator and an Android emulator, and your code can be hot reloaded into these emulators. So as soon as you change something, you see the change in the emulator. And you can see both emulators at the same time, as long as you're running a Mac, because you can't emulate iOS on Linux because of Apple.
We can only emulate on Mac devices because that's Apple's policy.
Yes, exactly. But the thing about having this hot reload thing, that's something that the technical term for that is a short feedback loop. And if you want to have a happy developer, you want to have the shortest possible feedback loop. An example of a slow feedback loop would be you write some code, then you have to compile it, then you take that compiled file and you put it on the device, you load up the device or maybe even restart the device, and then you can see your changes, like 10, 15 minutes after you wrote the code. That's terrible. It'll take you forever to do any kind of prototyping because you're making changes you're not really sure about. And then you're doing all of this deployment stuff to get it to run. And then you see, oh, no, this doesn't work. I can't do this. And now I have to make another change. It'll take you all day just to get to somewhere reasonable. So if you want to have a really good system, you need a really short feedback loop, as short as possible.
Exactly.
Like,
And Chad has one question, and that
Yeah.
is like, why is it difficult to come up with Python exe? Like, why is it so hard to make a exe on Python? Like, we have some libraries, but they show like a ton of errors.
Well, PyInstaller is a good example of one that works fairly well for simple things. But the reason that it's so difficult is because, I mean, Python isn't compiled, it's interpreted.
It's interpreted. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and interpreted languages, getting them compiled is kind of a hack.
How are they doing that? Because like, I want to come up with like one more point, but can we have a discussion over this?
How they do? How does
Yeah, how they
PyInstaller
do
work?
that hacky stuff.
Essentially, it compiles a Python interpreter, and then it sticks the code inside of the ecosystem that the compiled app has access to. So it compiles the Python code and an interpreter into an executable file. But as
That
it turns
sounds
out,
like a lot of like Java stuff because I had
hmm,
seen this meme like there's a figure of Earth and they are like Python is C and there is someone shooting from behind and they are saying like it has always been like that, like it has always been like C. Is it something like that? What is happening?
yeah, I think it's similar to Java. Um,
Like
but
Java is like both Python, like interpreter and compiler. Boom.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, but no, but in my experience, PyInstaller works fairly well. So I would recommend you look into that if you actually need to have an executable.
all right.
Okay.
Our next question would be something that since due to the COVID pandemic situation here, there's something called tutorial hell that I think most students have, stuck onto. It's like they keep on adding the course but never applying it practically or doing any projects on it. So they just go to Coursera, they complete the course, they keep the certificate, add it to the CV, and that's it. But I don't think that adds to their skill set as a programmer or a developer. So what is your take on that, and how do you
Udit,
think combat it?
I think we are talking about the problem known as tutorial help, like
Uh,
a
exactly.
proper tutorial help problem that people are viewing tutorials, but they aren't getting any close to what they want to build. Like they want to build something, but they aren't getting any close because they are just watching tutorials like it's a Netflix show, like monkey see, monkey do stuff. What's your
Yeah,
view on that?
it's very, this kind of passive learning is problematic. Some people get stuck in a passive learning loop for years, and they just keep doing more tutorials, and they don't know when they're ready. Like when is it enough? When can I start writing code? And of course, the answer is you should have already have started writing code. You should start writing code as early as possible. And I think that it helps to think of, so what we usually recommend is that people start with like learning the absolute basics, the syntax. You have to learn the syntax. So you start by learning the syntax. You could pick up any beginner book. There are many, many good books out there for
Right.
any language. And once you know the syntax, you have to find like a real project, something, a real problem to solve. Because the learning process should be driven by, it should be motivated by need. So you should be learning about classes because you need classes, not just because they're the next step in some sort of passive learning process, but because you need them for something. They would be useful. You should learn decorators because, oh, you're looking into web frameworks and Flask has lots of decorators and I need to understand how they work, something like that. So you don't have to learn everything. You just start, and then as you're solving a problem, as you're doing your project, it'll become apparent to you what you need to learn next. And then you learn that on the fly, on the job. This is the best way that you can learn. You just have to get started as soon as possible. And to help people get out of these passive learning loops at Python Discord, we try to have as many events as possible. We try to activate our users. So we will put together hackathons, workshops and tutorials and that kind of thing, and of course code jams and game jams and anything that people can participate in and that we can sort of teach them and get them started doing something. Because doing anything is better than doing nothing.
Like, how do you engage like participation of the people? Like, what kind of activities like specifically engage the participation of the people
In our community,
through your events on Python Discord, which people should join in the description down below? I'd reiterate that.
yeah, do join us. It's a lot of fun. Well, right now we're doing a Hacktoberfest event. Hacktoberfest is run by DigitalOcean, and GitHub is a partner in dev.to. And what they do is they say, if you contribute meaningful pull requests to open source repos during the month of October, if you do 4 good pull requests that get approved or in some way are not marked as invalid, then we will give you a t-shirt. And they just send you a t-shirt. And it's a cool t-shirt. I have a t-shirt for the last 2 years of this event. So at Python Discord, we embrace this event by telling everyone about it. We have a channel where you can sit and discuss. We recommend a couple of places that you can go in order to earn the pull requests. And if you're stuck, if you're trying to do a pull request to some open source thing, you can come to us. We will help you. We'll tell you how the Git stuff works, or what you should write in the pull request description, anything like that. You're welcome to come and ask us for help with. It can be a little daunting to do your first open source contributions in the world, but it's really fun when you get started. I highly recommend it. Open source was how I got into professional development. That was my path. So
Okay, coming to like this open source culture, that is like personally daunting to me. Like to get into the open source, I haven't gotten yet into the open source. So how does like one get into that, the open source, the world of open source? Like, what's the first thing we need to do?
Well, I guess you have to find something that you're interested in, some package that you think is really cool, or some project that you would like to contribute to. And then that's not always enough, because sometimes that project isn't really looking for contributors, but sometimes they are. And if you're lucky, you find a project that's interesting and in a language that you understand, and they have a good culture for allowing open source contributions. Maybe they have a file or some guides that explain how they want contributors to act. Maybe they have a community. Very often they have a community. Maybe on Discord or Slack or something that you can join. And this is, I think, the key, because if you really want to be a productive open source contributor, you have to get in touch with the people who are running that resource. So you got to get in touch with the maintainers or whoever it is, the creator, the owner, and just tell them, I want to help. And then often that's all you have to do, because at that point, if you tell them you want to help, and if you're capable of helping, they will put you to work because they need you. They will teach you what you need to know. They'll help you set up the development environment, and maybe you get to know some nice devs. So stuff like Django or Kivy or these major Python frameworks are always looking for contributors. It's easy to get into those projects. They have great onboarding for contributors who are interested.
Right. Because I mean, there's a popular meme that programmers are introverts, but then to program, you need to communicate with people.
Yeah.
Like that's a paradox we all run in.
Well, that's one of the problems we try to solve with these code jams I was talking about. By putting you in a team with strangers, you have to learn to communicate with them. But it is hard. Yeah, it's one of the challenges that we face is how do I get in touch with these people? Is it scary, finding the right community and so on? But you just have to dive into it. And often they will open their arms and welcome you into their community and welcome your help. It's a really good, when it gets rolling, it's easy. But you have to take that first step yourself. And that's why we have these events like the Hacktoberfest event now at Python Discord, because we know that it's a little scary, it's a little daunting. So if you are struggling with getting into the open source, come to us and we'll help you. We'll walk you through it. We'll tell you answer your questions. And it's a safe place where you can ask about open source contribution. You can even contribute to us if that's easier. We have great onboarding. I will personally get into a conversation with you on voice and walk you through how to set everything up and get it started. If you're interested in contributing to us, that's what I like to do.
We are like more than interested for that, and I think we can come for a possible collaboration if that's good.
Yeah, by all means, you're all welcome.
That's great.
Python is a very versatile language, in my opinion. We can create Python bots with it. We can create server bots, and we can use it in machine learning. But most often, people associate Python with machine learning because it's more than common in almost every college and every university. For machine learning, they're going to use Python. So, what is your take on the fact that yes, Python is a very versatile language and can be used for purposes other than machine learning?
So there was a developer survey, JetBrains, I think, that asked the people who participated in the survey, what do you use Python for? And by far the two most popular uses for it was data science and machine learning to some degree within there, and web development. And they're almost 50-50. Web development is huge for Python as well. And the rest of the people who responded said that they primarily used it for automation, DevOps, this kind of thing. So I'm working for a company called Dignio. We're a health tech provider, and we help doctors and patients get in touch with each other. We allow chronically ill patients who have diseases like COPD to be able to do measurements from home, and they use an app to communicate with a system that the doctor has access to, so they don't have to constantly go to the hospital in order to do these measurements. And all of our backend and our website, everything runs on a Python foundation. So lots of Python in our stack. So this is one example of how a startup is using Python. And Python's quite popular in fintech as well. Lots of financial places are using it to make like banking apps and personal finance stuff, like stock exchange things like that.
Yeah, so
Right.
Python is a versatile language. I hope we all can agree on that because
But
Yeah.
I have one doubt there because, like, when we come to the best programming languages, like there are so many trendy videos on YouTube that they say that we know we can rank best programming languages. Then one argument they made for Python is that Python is an interpreted language. So for your backend to manage like the large stuff, you would need C or C sharp, something like that. But I think Python has a strong point against that. What do you think? Like, is it necessarily making like scalable servers slow? What do you think? Like, what's your view on that?
Whether it's slowing things down?
Like, yeah, because it is interpreted, and I think people are misinterpreting that.
I mean, okay, so yeah, so we could talk about Python and speed. There's a lot of people who believe that Python is slow and therefore a bad language. Yes. I think this mostly stems from a misunderstanding. I mean, Python is essentially C, and C is lightning fast. So it isn't really slow. And the thing that happened in Python 3, in Python 2, a lot of things were written in pure Python, but that were changed into C extensions. So essentially, a lot of the stuff that is important that it goes really fast is now actually C. So when you run Pickle, or when you use NumPy, when you use anything that's very like computationally intensive in Python, it's probably actually a C script, not a Python script that you're running behind the scenes. So this is one reason why it's wrong that Python is slow, but it used to be slow because
I mean, I
running
think
all of these things in
libraries
C, it's
are
kind of a
pretty
new thing. But then the most important point to make is that it doesn't really matter if it's slow in some contexts, not everything has to be lightning fast. Certain things have to be very fast. Like database interactions have to be fast. You might need really fast APIs in order to, if you're serving thousands of requests per second, and you need like very fast data analysis and like traversal of big data. For instance, speed is really important. But we have the tools to make those specific things fast, right? So there are really fast Python web frameworks. There are very fast data traversal and data analysis tools. Those things aren't slow. There are other parts of Python that are slow, but it doesn't matter because performance isn't important for those things. For those things, it's much more important that it's quick to write the app and easy to test it and easy to read it and maintain it. So you get lots of developer productivity in exchange for performance. So you say, I don't need performance here.
Are actually slow.
Sorry?
Can we come to the parts that are actually slow in the Python that we can address the elephant in the room?
Well, like I said, some things are running on C, some things are pure Python. If you write your own algorithms in Python to traverse data or whatever, instead of making use of all of the nice tools that exist out there, it might be slow, yes.
You would go slow. Exactly.
But you shouldn't be doing that. You should be traversing that data with the accepted best practice tools for that. And sometimes you should use a different programming language. Nobody's saying that you should use Python for everything. If performance is super critical, if you're writing embedded code, for instance, say you're working with a microcontroller and you need every possible ounce of performance that you can get out of it. Well, you shouldn't be writing Circuit Python for that microcontroller. It's possible to write embedded Python. The Circuit Python's really cool, by the way, and you guys should look into it. But it's not performant, and you should be writing that in some embedded language, like probably Arduino C or something like that. It's much faster. So in some cases, it's okay to say, this isn't the right fit for Python. Let's do it in a different language. Maybe if you need some super performant server stuff, you might be using like Rust or Go. And there are many cases where you should write a little tool, and then Python can call that tool if you need Python involved in every nook and cranny. But the goal isn't to have a completely homogeneous environment where you only use Python for everything. You should use Python for the stuff that it makes sense to use Python for. And luckily, it's so versatile that you can use it for a lot of things.
You can actually make it like 90% homogeneous.
Maybe, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
It depends on your use case, of course, but you should never go for 100, but 90 might be okay.
90 might be okay, or like 80. Yeah. 80-20 rule is like famous all over the world.
It's just, you should use the best tool for the job. And a lot of the time, maybe that's Python, but some of the time it isn't, and that's fine.
That's actually like more like contextual side of it. So I had this interview, like I was applying for my off-campus placements, and then I cleared the aptitude, and then they asked me like, write a code, and I said I know Python, and they were like, don't use functions, you gotta write the Python code, and I was like, it would be slow. You can ask me to do that, but it would be slow.
Right. Yeah. So that's have to write everything from scratch.
Relatable instance that actually struck me when we had this conversation. And so my next question is like, what are your views on like Python? Like, I think in Anaconda we use this C and Python. Python.
Yeah, Python is essentially what I was talking about earlier. How some tools have C extensions. Those are written in Python. So NumPy is essentially mostly Python, and that's great. If you can write C or C++, and you need to solve some problem that needs to be very performant, or where it's convenient to use C++ for it, maybe it has a library or framework that you need, something like that. Python is amazing. There's lots of Python in lots of big modules and plugins that are very famous, and in the standard library. So it's a great tool, and it's one of the huge advantages that we have in the Python language, really, is the ability to outsource certain jobs to C++ without even really leaving the ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly. And I've heard that people have made animations, like what they would make like 2,000 lines in C, they would make it like 300 lines in Python. Like the whole animation video of 15 minutes. And that is like insane.
Yeah, that's very cool.
cannot expect like to code it and then use only 300 lines for that.
Yeah.
Like I'm blown away by its power. And Cython is like integral for like some. I was using a library called Manim, and it had involvement of Cython, Anaconda, because it had to integrate like latex and all of the things that are behind, like to make shapes and to make write the text.
Hmm.
I think I'm approaching it correctly, right?
Yeah.
I'm subject to all the corrections that is required.
It sounds more or less right. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, talking about projects, Leon, can you tell us a little bit about the projects you have made in Python and the projects a college student or a university student should spend time on Python projects so that it improves his CV or gets a good learning curve with it? Some projects that you might want to recommend.
Yeah, some like skeleton view of it.
Right.
Obviously, that's
Uh,
not a yardstick, but still.
so I'll mention a couple that I've made. I have a long list, of course, but just to give some ideas, I think that the projects should really be determined not by some list that someone else gives you, but by like any kind of need that you observe in the world. So my approach has always been to try to solve real world problems. One of the first projects was this bot that I've been talking about for the community. That was something that was requested. People wanted a bot. They wanted certain features. So I put the bot there, and we even put a little feedback function in it. And then people could write suggestions for like, I want the bot to be able to do this. And then we kept getting new work. So we could keep extending the bot in the way that the community actually wanted us to. And then I made a project, which was, it was like in, a social printer. It was this a very small, self-contained device with a touch screen. The idea was that you would take pictures of yourself and like hashtag them on Twitter or something, and then
Okay.
this device would go on Twitter and look at the hashtag and get all the photos and display them on the touch screen, and you could just press the button and print straight out of the box. And the idea was that we would place this device at like expos and events and stuff. And then everyone who goes to the event, they can take pictures all over the event and hashtag them. And the printer could just print them. When you were on your way out, you could get like a printed copy of that photo. Never really took off, but it was a fun idea. And they used Pygame as the interface. Then I made a lot of productivity tools and Devops type of things for Python Discord especially. I mean, we made the website, which is a Django app. We made the bot, which is a discord.py app. But also started making like automatic deployment stuff. So that's, I made this tool that I use for my personal projects called Hoplite. And
Okay,
Hoplite
Hoplite.
is essentially all it does is you send it a web request. It's a small web server based on Hug, which is a micro framework, kind of like Flask, it's just even smaller. And you send it a request and you say, I want to deploy this app. And then it goes onto your server and it deploys it for you. And so I can hook that up to GitHub, because GitHub has like webhooks that it can send out. So whenever I push to master, send a webhook to this app that I built to Hoplite, and Hoplite, all it does is it just refreshes the source control and it pulls a new image from Docker Hub and redeploys. It's a very, very simple and straightforward solution to automatic deployment that doesn't involve anything complicated like SaltStack or Kubernetes. It's not something I use for big projects, but it's something that's nice for like small projects.
That like you have a custom system for your small projects,
Yeah,
and
and a little server that
yeah,
they live
like
on.
can we have like main functions of the project, the last project you made, basically?
Well, I suppose the last project that I did was a video chat thing for work. So I just there's have you heard of Twilio? Twilio is an application that works with lots of different programming languages, including Python, that allows you to make calls, send SMSs, or set up video chat rooms. So I implemented the Twilio video chat stuff in order to create a video chat that looks a little bit like Slack or Discord when you start a call there. And then
Wait, did you use like WebRTC?
yeah,
Or
Twilio
was it
uses WebRTC.
WebRTC? Okay.
Yeah. So, just a simple sort of, you start the call. I even made the sound effects for it myself because I dabble a little in music, as you can see behind me. So,
Yeah.
a very simple video chat app that you could use to talk to people. And it even supported groups. So you could have like 10 people in the chat, and it would arrange the images around, and whoever was speaking gets the priority and gets to be in the middle. Little things like that. It's very easy to build something like that with Twilio and using Python and some web language. We wrote it in Angular.
Okay. So that actually gets like that actually like wakes up one side of me, and that is like, did you have any experience regarding like automating your music with Python? Like you use a digital audio workstation, right? Which one do you use, by the way?
I use Reaper.
You use?
Um, Reaper. It's a free one. That's very nice. Reaper FM. It's
Okay, I use a cracked version of FL Studio. I shouldn't be saying that on stream, but still,
You really definitely should not be saying that on stream.
right.
No, I've worked with Cubase and I worked with FL, but Reaper is a very nice sort of simple and straightforward. It's very designed not for making electronic music, but for recording stuff. So it's fantastic for that. So if you want to record some instruments, then Reaper is a great free option for that.
If we don't have instruments at home, then can we use Reaper?
I mean, if you only want to make digital music with plugins and stuff, like
Yeah.
running synths and stuff, then I would probably not use Reaper. I would maybe go for something like Ableton or FL.
Okay. So is there any library in Python that we can use to implement that? Like automate stuff for us?
That's a good question. I actually have never really tried to make music with Python, but it sounds interesting. I know that there is a library written by Kenneth Wrights called something like PyMusic.
I mean, is it really a thing? I'm just blown away.
All it does is it sort of it allows you to look up chords and to play simple chords and to use it for knowing something about music in a sense. So you can translate certain, like a chord is really the basic, but I don't know it. I haven't used it that much. Kenneth Wright is the guy who wrote Requests, by the way. He's quite a famous Python plugin guy, and his music thing is the only thing that comes to mind when I think about it. Writes music Python. He wrote something called, I can't even find it here now. I'll dig it up for you. PyTheory is the name. So it's music theory, essentially.
One second, is it there? Can you please send it on the chat if that's good? Or maybe like, okay, you have sent it. I'll just send on the public chat for everyone to
Um,
see.
I'm doing a terrible job of telling you what it is, but it can do scales, it can play notes on your PC speaker, it can show you chord fingerings, custom tunings, and allow you to essentially make an app that has something to do with music theory. Imagine that you make one of the lyrics sites, like
Right.
guitar tabs or whatever, and you want to be able to show someone how to play a chord. Well, this is a thing that you could use in order to generate those images and like have information about how to translate the music into information in a good way. So that's the only thing that comes to mind for Python.
I
Exactly.
think we
I think
move on to our next section of meme review because there are many people waiting for it, and it's a very well planned thing we did.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll just share my screen. Yatharth, can you add my other user? I think some network issues. Yeah. I think Yatharth is facing some network issues.
Okay. While we wait for that,
Yeah, we'll them and then we'll start the meme review. We can talk. Yeah, we can just talk about Python.
so you asked me to prepare 5 things I had learned from running the community.
Yeah.
And I brought with me
so. Yeah,
I brought with me 5 of these ideas that I can take away from running a community for 3 years that I might want to share with you guys, because now you are starting a community, and maybe you can learn something from that experience that I've had. So while we wait for the technical problems, let me go through that quick list. I think the number one thing I've learned from running Python Discord is that culture is the most important thing that you can do to have a good community. You need a good culture. And by that, I mean, you can't allow any kind of toxicity. You can't allow people to bully each other. You can't allow people to make fun of each other. You have to absolutely come down on that like a ton of bricks and eliminate it the minute you see it. Because if you don't have a good culture, then nobody wants to use your community. So we have had very fierce moderation to get rid of anyone who has a bad attitude, essentially. And I think you need to search for those kinds of people and get them out of your community, because they are a poison. They will ruin your entire community. They will rot it out. And the problem with it is that if one person is allowed to do that and you don't do anything about it, other people will learn from him, and suddenly it spreads like a disease. So you have to get rid of it.
It's like that bad apple theory, I think.
Yeah. It's a very big thing.
One bad apple actually like screws up all of the apples in the room, and gone. Your basket is gone. Your sales is down.
You have to get rid of those bad apples. The second thing I learned is that SEO, search engine optimization, is really important. So we were lucky because we had a really popular Reddit post that showed up if you searched for a Python Discord. And we were like, well, I mean, people will search for Python Discord if they're looking for a Discord server that has to do with Python. So we doubled down and we said, let's just call ourselves Python Discord. Let's get pythondiscord.com. Let's start using the term everywhere. Let's start a Python Discord YouTube channel, a Twitter, everything. And all of this will direct to our community. So whenever someone Googles Python Discord, they will definitely get us. There's no chance they won't get us. And now we are like the top 10 hits if you Google Python Discord are basically related to us. And I think that this is the only reason that we're growing so fast and getting so many users, is that we have such good SEO. So if you really want to capture a term, it's a good idea to just really like focus, like even buy that domain and like call yourself that thing that you're trying to get people to search for, whatever. That really worked for us. And the third thing that I learned is that if you have a community, you can't run it like a direct democracy. You have to have some sense of democracy. Like people have to feel like they are part of every decision, and you want to involve your users. But it has to, at some point, you can't ask everyone what everyone thinks of everything, because nothing will ever get done. If you try to get a consensus,
you cannot like please all of them.
Sorry? What'd you say?
You cannot like please all of them.
You can never please all of them. The bigger that your organization is, the more impossible it is. So, and it also takes a long time to gather a consensus. You have to maybe release some sort of survey or a poll, and then see what the result is. So you should hear what everyone's opinion is, and you should factor those in. But then you, as a leader, have to make a decision and move forward. You can't let the community decide everything. And often the community doesn't know what they want. You need to figure out what they want. That's your job. So you can't have a direct.
I think that's what.
Go on.
Right. I mean, that's what means to take a lead of the community. That you are actually being decisive. Like community has a like tendency to make you indecisive, because like everyone wants to be heard, right? And then you have to take the charge. That I have to take this decision, and I will move forward with it.
Yes, but you can't move forward with a decision that doesn't seem like it was informed by what anyone said. Like you can't ignore what people are saying. You have to listen to them and factor that into your decision, of course. But ultimately, it needs to be your decision, or else you don't have much of a community.
So you take all the opinions from all the members, but the final call is yours, and what you do is going to affect the entire community, and that's where once you take a charge and be a leader.
Yeah, sometimes you have to make a decision that people didn't want because it's the best thing for your community. But usually you should listen to your community because they are very smart and they know everything. So they are almost always right, but there is occasionally a case where they are wrong. And I think as a leader, you have to be smart enough to see when they are wrong and make the other decision, even though it's difficult, and it will be very controversial. Okay, so lesson 4, it's very easy to get a sponsorship. If you have a nice thing like this, you can probably get sponsorships quite easily. If you go and ask tech companies, they have a budget for sponsoring clubs and communities and this kind of thing. Almost everyone we've asked has said yes when we have asked for a sponsorship for the thing that we're doing. We've gotten sponsorships from Linode, from JetBrains, DigitalOcean, from the Django Software Foundation. All sorts of people have wanted to help us because they have money set aside for that. So you need to go ask for those sponsorships, put together events, do giveaways. People will be happy to help you with that. I thought it would be much harder to get these kinds of things, but it actually turns out to be pretty easy.
Absolutely.
And the last thing that I wanted to say is that controversy can sometimes be a good thing.
Okay, let's get into that.
That's a little bit of an interesting thought, because sometimes we do something controversial. For instance, once a year we have a Pride event for a month. This attracts a lot of controversy. There are cultures that don't accept this at all. And we get some people saying nasty things in the chat. So you might conclude from that well, maybe it has a bad effect on the atmosphere and that we shouldn't do it. But there are many benefits to something like that. You get people talking. You get strong opinions out there. Sometimes if someone says something really inappropriate, you can get rid of that person. Okay, so now your community is a little bit better because you got rid of that person. So that's like a downside, that's kind of advantage. But I think that just activating the community in any way, it generates a lot of conversation, activity, and strong opinions, new issues, new programming functionality sometimes. So even though it might be a little hard for some people when you do something controversial like that, or even something bad, like I had an episode a couple of months ago where I accidentally pinged 90,000 people in the community by quoting the wrong.
Everyone.
Yes, it was pandemonium. We had 3 days of people just absolutely exploding in the general chat. The whole community was on fire. But we've seen more activity ever since that happened. It actually brought people to the community who might never have seen it otherwise, and it created some interesting conversation that led to certain things happening. It's better to have this kind of sort of adversity and controversy than to have nothing. It's better that it's active with people arguing than that everyone is quiet. So like controversy can have benefits too. So you don't have to think of it as a disaster every time something happens that isn't universally claimed to be a good thing. Maybe it's okay. You can survive a little bit of controversy, just not all the time. You have to be a little careful,
This is like the typical example of @everyone in a big server like this.
Yeah.
Exactly. I was saying that in the middle.
Yeah.
Right. So I had this like speaking of the controversy, I think it's not just the bad apples anymore. It's the caffeinated apples. Like
Caffeinated apples?
Yep. Like they are making everyone alert out there. That's just one stands for on it.
Yeah. Caffeinated apples.
Let's take up some questions from the live chat.
Yeah. Speaking of the democracy, let's have some questions from the chat. What editor are you using for your projects?
I like PyCharm. Sorry?
JetBrains PyCharm, right?
Yeah, I use PyCharm Pro for all of my projects. I use a little bit of Sublime on the side when I need to, just for really simple editing. But PyCharm, as a professional dev, PyCharm kind of has everything I need. Like I can manage source control. I can interact with Docker containers. I set up my virtual environments. all these things that beginners probably wouldn't need to do, but that are very important in a professional setting. PyCharm delivers all of that. So I'm not sure I would recommend PyCharm to an absolute beginner. I think maybe you should start with something like VS Code. It's a fantastic editor, and it's not that complicated to wrap your head around. But you should consider PyCharm if you are going to be doing Python professionally, because it has a lot of really nice features, especially the Pro version, which has the web frameworks built in with like excellent integrations to Django and Flask, which are very helpful to me as a person who works a lot with web development. And we are also graciously sponsored by JetBrains at Python Discord, so I get free licenses to the Pro versions since we do so much open source. A lot of open source projects can get free stuff from JetBrains.
Okay. Next question we have, what do you need to know in Python to be job ready?
Well, it depends on the job. But I like to think, I think that what you need to know is more about, as a developer in general, like you need to know how to write code in any language, and you can learn Python. I learned JavaScript on the job. Now I write a bit of JavaScript for my job. It's no problem. But I already knew other programming languages, and I had done lots of projects. I think that as a rule of thumb, you need to know the syntax, and then you need to have done some projects, like real projects. And you might need to know the tools that really don't have anything to do with Python, but are like surrounding tools like source control, for instance, is a great example. You really should know source control before you are ready for a software development job. You might want to learn unit testing and have some exposure to methodologies like working in an agile way, or Devops. Stuff like that is probably more important, because being a developer is about a lot more than just writing code. You have to understand all of these, like all the other stuff. There's a lot of other stuff. I only read code maybe 30-40% of the time, like a lot of the other stuff is spent with all the other things that go into it, code review and validation and deployments and sitting in meetings, doing stand-ups, all that stuff.
Right, we are right. So is that all we have for the questions, or that we have the next question? To be a contributor, you need to give what you're using already. I think the person wants to know your stance on it.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So I think there's a follow-up question that, are you guys planning a partnership with Linode in any way in future?
Python Discord is already sponsored by Linode, so we have a relationship to them. And right now, they are giving us all of the infrastructure we need in order to run our servers. So we are running on Linode servers. As for that's sort of a partnership, but is there anything particular in terms of like having them as a sponsor for our events? Maybe we could probably ask them about that. I don't know what else we would do with Linode in terms of a partnership, but they're very helpful. We love Linode. They're excellent.
Right. So what are the languages we can combine Python with so that we can create web apps? I think we have talked about Python, but he's exploring for the possible more synergies.
Yeah, this is a good question. A web app consists typically of a lot of languages. If you want to write a good web app, you kind of have to understand, well, Python maybe will provide you with your backend, but you need a little bit of a templating language like Jinja or Django templating language, which is essentially HTML with bells and whistles. So you need probably to understand HTML. You probably need CSS so that you can style your website, or SCSS if you want something more modern that it does the same thing, but it's a little easier to work with. You will almost always need a little bit of JavaScript. So it's a good idea to learn JavaScript if you're getting into the web development world. And the reason for this is because Python isn't built into your browser, but JavaScript is. Every browser can interpret JavaScript. So you just have to have some things written in JavaScript. There's no way around it. You will probably need to at least know the very basics of SQL or SQL so that you can set up your ORM to manage the databases for you. A lot of that can be abstracted away to tools. Django comes with a really good tool for handling most of the database stuff for you, but it's a good idea to understand the basics of SQL as well. And if you want a modern reactive front end, you may have to learn an SPA framework, which a single page application, that would be something like React or Angular or Vue, which means that your website will be able to update live on the fly without reloading. You will have changes happening on that website as they occur. This is a little difficult to do without using one of these JavaScript frameworks. So if you really want to be competitive in today's web app world, you probably want to learn an SPA framework. And React or Angular can work very well together with Python. We use Angular where I work as our front-end framework, and then we have Python in the backend.
I think we have time for one last question. Yeah. It is very easy to learn a new language, but remembering most of the bulletin methods, third-party library methods of the language is not easy. How can one remember 2 or more languages in such a way? That's a good question.
That's a good question. I don't think you should. I don't think you should be remembering all the built-ins and third-party library methods. I think that you should get comfortable looking up that documentation as fast as possible, so that it's always at your fingertips, and that you shouldn't be memorizing an entire language, because that's a waste of memory. Your brain can't fit that many languages. But what you can do is you can use an excellent documentation browser, and there are apps that you can essentially assign a keyboard shortcut, and within 2 seconds you can bring up the documentation that's relevant for the thing that you're working on. So you don't have to remember it, because you just have to remember, like, oh, well, I think this is possible. You need to know what's possible. You don't need to know what arguments those things take or how to call them. Your IDE can provide that information to you on the fly. When you start writing it, it will suggest autocompletes. Your documentation browser can bring up the relevant part of the documentation. You should rely on these tools to remember stuff for you. And you just need to get really good at looking up that information as fast as possible, and it'll be almost as fast as remembering it. So then you can remember many languages, because you only have to remember a little bit about like how they work, what's possible, not how every built-in works.
Absolutely, that's very well said.
Right.
I think we should move on to the meme review next. Yeah. So I'll be sharing my screen.
Now comes one of the best parts of the stream.
Okay. I do not know what to expect.
All right. Can you guys see my screen?
There are so many of the screen shares right there.
I can see it.
I think we can have one of them. Are we all good on the camera? Okay, cool. So
Yeah.
there are certain slides that we have. Hey, so we have the first slide out there.
Python is the easier language to learn.
Oh my god.
You have to get errors for writing an extra space. Yeah.
Yep.
And that's what like difference between the spaces and tabs do, I think. I think most of them are confused between the spaces and tabs. They're like four spaces is equal to 1 tab, so they would press the 4 spaces and then 5. Boom.
Yeah, but
the story is over.
If you have a good IDE, it will handle all of that for you. You never have the possibility to write an extra space, because it'll just fix it. And it doesn't matter if you write tabs or spaces, because it'll just convert them to spaces. You just let your IDE handle all of this.
In the middle of a project and you have written a code, and one error comes and you could just can't find that indentation, and then you realize, oh, it's an indentation error.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, next one.
No, actually, like that happened to me when I was like, yeah. 1 second, Udit, I had this thing like with my previous meme. Actually, I had an experience associated with it. Like when Google Colab was in like in first of its days, like 2017 or 2016, I was coding. It didn't have that feature to include the tabs. So I was like pressing spaces, and then I pressed 5 or 3. I was gone. Like the whole night of writing code was like gone in jiffy.
Yeah.
So can we have the next meme, please?
I think we have already seen this one, but it's still worthy of a discussion.
Yep.
We do have a convention for defining a constant. It's just in what we call screaming snake case, all uppercase letters. But of course, it's not actually a constant.
Yeah.
Like, can you just elaborate a bit more on that?
Well, and the convention is that if you're going to be using something in a constant way, you should name it with all uppercase letters. So if you see a variable that's named with all uppercase, then you're expected to leave it alone. Don't go changing that variable. It's just supposed to be a constant.
Yeah.
But of course, you still have the option to change it as much as you want, because this is Python, and we don't have rules like this. You are an adult. You can do whatever you want. That's the Python methodology. We don't place these kinds of constraints.
Yeah.
Ha! I like it.
Yeah, this one is also one of my favorites. So it's hard to write in brackets in main, but in Python, you can just write directly. I think Yatharth is reconnecting. You with us, Yatharth? Hello.
Sorry, I was glitching out apparently, so that caused some errors.
And what are you doing on this one?
So that's
Writing?
Are you asking me?
No, I'm asking Yatharth.
It's hard.
basically writing code in JavaScript is just like me glitching out right now. And the sword I have that I've worn this glasses.
Absolutely.
And basically Python one, as I again told you, I mean I was just blown away with when they did a 15-minute animation and like 300 lines of code. That sounds like quite unrealistic.
Yep.
So going to the next one.
Yep. Can we have the next one?
You know, this scene in the movie Incredibles, I just love it. It says maths is math. It's one of my favorite scenes.
Python is the only homo that we are fan of.
Yeah. All right.
I mean, imagine being called as a homo variable. Like, what's your orientation? It's I'm a homo variable.
All right. Going to the next one. I think we've discussed a lot about
Nice.
Python accent performance with GIL.
There are some people working on what they call the gilectomy. The idea that we can maybe one day remove the GIL, but yeah, we'll see. It might be Python 4. Maybe there's no GIL if we ever even get there.
One can hope for, right?
Hmm.
But nice term, gilectomy.
Yeah, I love the term. It's very nice.
All right, going to the next one.
That's what my teacher told me on actually. Like I was writing the code in Python, like for the data structures and algorithms, and she was like, "You don't get to write the pseudocode in your IDE, please."
Yeah.
Like, do you have any experience pertaining to that?
Yeah, I think this is one of the reasons I fell in love with Python, because it just reads like English. Some sentences are just like, is this really programming, or it's just English?
Yeah, actually, like in hindsight, if we say that we are communicating to computer, and that's what programming languages are for.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
Python does exactly that.
Yeah.
Okay, now moving on to the next one.
So we have the next meme, and basically that's all of them. Exactly.
Let's take a moment and discuss how Python does not require semicolons. Like, one of the best
And
things about
sorry,
Python.
it's like a hot bus. Like, would it like I'm imagining this as Tinder. Like you get like Python gets a tab, right swipe, and then a semicolon, left swipe. That's it. We don't do that here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right, going to the next one.
Yep, I have seen all of the I've seen tertiary statements in Python. So does your Python right? No, but it can hurt you in other ways. Indentation error. Exactly. That's that
Even
was I think there was a lot of confusion between like tabs and spaces. Is it discussed in the Python Discord, like about tabs and spaces? I've seen that on your Reddit.
Yeah, I mean, the Python enhancement proposal 8, PEP 8, is the style guide, the official style guide for Python, and it makes it very clear that in Python, the indentation style is 4 spaces. It's not 1 tab or 2 spaces, it's 4 spaces. And in Python, we make 4 spaces. That's how it is. You can make tabs, but you shouldn't. And instead, you should be using the tab key on your keyboard. Absolutely, it's very convenient.
Exactly.
But that key should produce 4 spaces.
Right.
And you can do that in your editor very easily. Just convert all tabs to spaces, and you're good. It's so easy. It takes you 1 click, and then you've solved this problem forever. You will never mix tabs and spaces again.
Yeah, imagine like your Nigerian boys. I actually like in that hackathon that you met, they would have coded all of that in Notepad on Android phone
Yeah, that's right.
with all the 4 spaces. I mean, how would have life been?
Well,
Space, and then that's it.
the benefit is if you'll never mix up tabs and spaces if you're on an Android device, because I don't think they have a tab key.
Yeah, but sometimes debugging code in Notepad, like on an Android device, that's
Yeah, it's crazy.
find just 1 space, that's out of line.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to the next one.
Next meme, please. Oh, that's the response that I get from Python, but I like it when Python says K
Okay.
because when it's not potassium, it actually goes in fire.
Actually, this meme is from my classmate. I just opened it to my group, and they were like, "Oh, yeah," and they were like spamming me with the memes, and then this one was the one I chose to show in this stream. All right, going with the next one.
Exactly. Insanity is doing. One second. Aren't we at the meme?
Yeah, that's good.
I, Yatharth, are you with us? I would love.
Yeah, I was just glitched out actually.
Yeah, yeah, I think I would love for you to do a voice, for this meme.
Okay, Albert Einstein. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Machine learning. That's exactly like
Exactly.
it does it, but a little better, I think.
Nice. Good job.
I think that's
Exactly.
the
And we are at the end of the meme review. So, any final words, Leon? We're at the end of the podcast, and it was like fun, honestly.
Yeah, I had a lot of
Like
fun.
to inaugurate.
I
Yeah.
really appreciate you guys bringing me on. I wish you lots of luck with this community that you're creating, and of course, if there's anything I can do to help you, any questions I can do to answer so to make it easy for you, just let me know. I will do my
I
best.
think we can connect offline or over the Python Discord server. That is in the link in the description down below.
Yeah,
And
um,
before
I'm pleased to it.
we
go ahead,
definitely should.
yeah, I would like to add that uh, me and Leon met only through this Python Discord server, and he has been so helpful and forthcoming. I just pinged him on Discord saying that, hey, we are doing a webinar and we would like you to be the guest of it. And he's like, yeah, sure. He's been so helpful with us editing the graphics and posting it in his server. And that's how communities work. If you want something and you are looking out for it, they'll always welcome you. And
Yeah.
that's something I wanted to mention.
I mean, communities love other communities. I mean, we love what you guys are doing because this is exactly the same. You have the same mission as us. You want to educate, and I think communities are a necessity. We have to have good communities, as many as possible, everywhere. And if you're not part of a community, you should be, because that's how we can really achieve like magnificent things and learn together, meet the people who we can maybe work with or study with. It's really important. So I really appreciate that you guys are making a club like this, and yeah, it's dear to my heart.
Yeah. If you are in the NorthCap University and you want to know about Python or already are pretty fluent in Python or just anything to do with code, I'll pin a comment in the comment box for the WhatsApp group that we have, and you should join it and check it out. We are going to have some pretty amazing hackathons planned ahead. Please join our community and also Leon's Discord server, and also like and share this video on our webinar if you like the conversation.
Great. Thank you so much, guys, for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right, guys.
And thank you so much for coming, actually.
Yeah.
Entirely my pleasure.
Have a nice time. As